The following is a special presentation of WILS News. Listener discretion is advised.
To a board, I will protect. A word remindful of the days when knights wore armor to defend their walled cities against invaders. Today there are no walled cities, but the word to a bore is still the living word for the guardians of your city, the men of the Detroit Police Department.
While much of what the Jerome Kavanaugh administration had achieved and attempted to achieve during its first 5 years in office, the biggest and most controversial move came December 12, 1961, when the mayor-elect appointed the liberal, progressive, and white Michigan Supreme Court Justice George Edwards, Jr. to the post of police commissioner. Detroit native and Ohio State University professor Kevin Boyle spoke about Edwards' background.
George Edwards is one of the great liberals in Detroit political history, and he, in fact, had run for mayor himself in 1949 and had lost because he was thought of as too weak, too liberal on the race question. Edwards had come out of the UAW. He was very, very close to Walter Reuther. He had, for a while, been Walter Reuther's protege in the UAW back in the 40s. And to put him in charge of that police department in the early 1960s is about as amazing a political move as you could make.
The city is in trouble today because it isn't dealing successfully with its newcomers. They're still pouring in, not from County Cork or Bavaria or Sicily or Galicia, but from Jackson, Mississippi and Memphis, Tennessee, and a host of towns and hamlets with names like Sunflower, Rolling Fork, and Dyersburg. The new immigrants are distinguished from their older residents not by religion or national origin, but by color. George Edwards, 1962.
Edwards left his judgeship on the Michigan Supreme Court to take the daunting job of overhauling the controversial tactics and reputation of the Detroit Police Department.
To the Detroit Police Department, to a bore has deep significance. For 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, rain or shine, these are the men who serve the city of Detroit, working together as a team for the protection of the lives and property of the people of Detroit.
While this 1951 recruitment film issued by the Detroit Police Department depicts a sanitized, lily-white, all-American hero lifestyle awaiting anyone who earns a Detroit Police badge, that same badge had long ago developed a reputation among Detroit's 500,000 black residents as a racist, brutal oppressor. Michigan native Roger Wilkins, who at the time of the 1967 riot was the head of community relations in the Lyndon Johnson administration, spent a lot of time in Detroit in the early 50s while attending the University of Michigan. Wilkins recalls that even at that time, the Detroit Police Department's relationship with Detroit's black community was strained.
I had a lot of friends in Detroit, so I spent a lot of time in Detroit in the 7 years I was in Ann Arbor. And even in the early 50s, it was taken for a gospel in the black community that the police were brutal. And they were known to use their batons freely on black people who didn't do what they wanted, and those batons were generally in the black community referred to as nigger sticks.
We spoke with a 30-plus year veteran of the Detroit Police Department who, for this report, asked that we keep his name confidential. We agreed to his request. As this report progresses, we will refer to him as Officer X. Officer X told us of how police procedure was much different in his early days in the department.
The police department governed with a heavy hand back then. There was nobody took no from nobody. I mean, if somebody was told to move, they better move. If they didn't move, there was hell to pay. It was, when I came on, I was astonished how things were done. Something you would write a ticket for today, somebody got their ticket for it then. Although if somebody, spoke politely to the police officers, they never harmed them. If somebody got lippy, they got the hell kicked out of them. That's the way things were then.
Here are men experienced in every phase of police work, men familiar with the workings of the law, men who are proud of their heritage.
John Sinclair, a longtime Detroit resident, who had many run-ins of his own with the Detroit police in the 1960s as the leader of Detroit's hippie community and manager of the legendary rock band MC5, described the police department's standing with Detroit's black community this way.
Basically, they didn't want to look at the thing that these people were rebelling against an occupying army. I mean, this went against every rhetorical device America had presented about the land of the free and the home of the brave and all that horse shit, you know. It's a ghetto. In those days, it was just to be suppressed and to make sure that they didn't get out of line.
In commando practice, cadet officers learn how a group of men working as one can be an effective wedge between destructive mobs and the peaceful citizen and his property.
Kevin Boyle agrees with Sinclair.
From the time that the African-American population in Detroit starts growing, which it does in the late teens and 20s, the police force in black neighborhoods, they act as a kind of occupying army. You know, they're infamous for the amount of harassment of African Americans. They do the amount of police brutality. In the 20s, the police force is a center of Ku Klux Klan activity. And so there's this decades, really, of animosity between the black community and the Detroit Police Department.
In the 7 years leading up to the riot, the Detroit police had solidified their reputation among Detroit's black community with several well-publicized events. In December 1960, 2 young white females, Marilyn Donahue and Betty James, were robbed and murdered in a 3-week span. Both alleged assailants were black men, and the murders ripped open the deep racial scars of the city. A recent unsolved murder spree in Detroit has prompted Mayor Mariani and Police Commissioner Herbert D. Hart to issue a state of emergency in the city. Hart ordered his officers to, quote, make searches on suspicion, then let the courts decide whether they are right or not, unquote.
He began to see the importance of prevention whenever possible. Prevention of accidents and prevention of crime.
In the resulting 2-week dragnet, more than 150,000 people, the vast majority being black, were stopped, searched, and questioned. However, only 4 court cases evolved from these encounters, and neither Donahue's nor James's killers were found because of them. In July 1963, tensions flared again when a black prostitute, Cynthia Scott, was shot and killed in an altercation with officers Theodore Spicker and Robert Marshall. The officers attempted to arrest Scott, who had money in her hand while walking with a companion, on larceny charges. Scott resisted and cut both officers with a knife. Spicker shot her 3 times during the altercation. Neither officer was charged with any wrongdoing, although Edwards subsequently removed Spicker from scout car duty. George Edwards left the police commissioner's post in December 1963 to return to the judicial bench, taking a seat on the U.S. Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Kavanaugh immediately appointed his top mayoral aide, Ray Girardin, as the new commissioner. Many were hopeful that Girardin, a longtime friend and colleague of Edwards and a one-time police beat reporter for the Detroit Times, would continue the aggressive attempt to reshape the Detroit Police Department. However, the racially charged incidents between the police and black community continued.
The police department investigated his background, his school record, his home environment, his personal habits. Every effort is made to select the finest men.
In September 1965, white officer Jimmy D. Parker, who had been involved in 7 previous incidents of police brutality, was suspended for 6 months for beating 15-year-old black youth Howard King while King was handcuffed. In a related note, Kenneth Johnson, a black police officer who had witnessed the beating along with 5 other white officers, originally filed a false report claiming no beating took place. When Commissioner Girardin, who had seen a different report on the incident from the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, asked Johnson to file another report, Johnson changed his story.
But there are times when it's too late for prevention, when a crime has already been committed. Then it is the police department's job to fit together the pieces of the puzzle that make up the crime, and using all the modern scientific police methods, trace and prove the guilt of the person or persons responsible.
Because of his belated honesty, Johnson faced daily harassment from his fellow officers. Johnson was also forced to forfeit 15 days' pay and was reprimanded for lying in his original report. None of the 5 white officers who also filed false reports were disciplined. The fact that Johnson had filed 2 reports was leaked to the press and community. That only served to intensify the black community's belief that the Detroit Police Department was racist and corrupt. With the seemingly unending tension between the Detroit Police Department and the city's black community, it should come as little surprise that the police force itself was comprised of mostly white officers. Hubert Locke, a Detroit native, was a local minister who also served as an administrative assistant to Commissioner Ray Girardin, told us about how black Detroit police officers, who numbered just 137 when Locke came into the department in 1966, were treated on the job.
Now, among those 137 officers, there were any number of veterans, black veterans, who could remember the period in the department in an earlier time when they were not allowed to make arrests of white citizens who broke the law. They could only apprehend the person, but they then would have to call for a white officer to come and make the formal arrest. So that's how bad things were historically within the department itself. It had just a very bad reputation of treating its own officers, its own black officers, so you can imagine the kind of treatment that black civilians received at the hands of the department.
Motor City Burning, a special presentation of WILS News, will continue in a moment.